My name is Laurel Whitfield. I'm 34 years old, and at Christmas dinner this past December, my mother raised her glass of wine, smiled at the family gathered around the table, and announced that she had finally, after months of back and forth, successfully sold my grandfather's house. Everyone clapped. My uncle made a toast. My cousins nodded, like people who are relieved a problem has been solved. I sat at the far end of the table with my hands in my lap, and I let them finish. I let the congratulations go around the table. I let my mother explain the price, and the buyer and how quickly it had all come together in the end. I let her finish every word, and then, when the table had settled back into the particular warmth of a family Christmas where everything has gone right, I said, "I need to tell you who bought it." My mother looked at me. "What do you mean?" "The buyer. The LLC that made the cash offer. What about it?" "That's my company, Mom. I bought the house." The table went so quiet I could hear the candles. Before we go on, drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from. And tell me if you've ever watched someone celebrate losing something they didn't understand they had. Because that's what this whole story is really about. Now let me take you back. All the way back. Because you need to understand who my grandfather was, before you can understand why what happened at that table mattered so much. My grandfather's name was Walter Whitfield. He was 88 years old when he died in April. He'd been born in the same county where he spent his entire life, had never lived anywhere else, had never particularly wanted to, because he had a philosophy about places that I've been thinking about ever since he first explained it to me when I was 9 years old. He said, "Some people go searching for the right place their whole lives. I found mine early, so I put my energy into building something worth staying in." He was talking about the house. He was almost always, in some way or another, talking about the house. Walter built it himself. This is not a metaphor or a family legend with the details softened by time. He literally built it. In the spring of 1962, he bought a piece of land in Millbrook, a lot that had a creek running along the back edge, and a stand of oak trees on the eastern side, that he specifically chose because of the way the afternoon light moved through them, and he started building. He was 28 years old. He had my grandmother beside him on the land in her work clothes every weekend. He had some friends who helped with the framing. He had a book on residential construction that he'd gotten from the library and read until the spine cracked. He did not have a contractor, an architect, or any professional help to speak of. He had patience, precision, and the particular kind of stubbornness that builds things that last. It took him 2 years. 2 years of weekends and summers and holidays, his regular job in the days and the house on the edges of every day that wasn't the job. He wired it himself. He laid the floors himself. He built the kitchen cabinets himself, a skill he'd developed specifically for that purpose, and then continued developing for the rest of his life in the workshop he attached to the back of the house in 1971. He moved in with my grandmother in the summer of 1964. They lived there for 60 years. He died in that house, in April, in the room where he'd always slept, in the bed he'd built himself in 1978, when the old one finally wore out. The house was not remarkable by any external measure, not large, not architecturally distinguished in any way a stranger would notice driving past. A 2-story craftsman on a quarter-acre in Millbrook painted the particular shade of dark green that my grandfather chose in 1964, and repainted in exactly the same color every 12 years like clockwork, because he believed that a house had a right to be itself without someone deciding it needed to be different. 4 bedrooms. A kitchen with windows facing the garden my grandmother planted and my grandfather maintained for 24 years after she died. A porch that wrapped around the front and one side, where my grandfather sat on summer evenings reading whatever library book he had at the time. A practice he continued without interruption until 3 weeks before his death. And the workshop. I need to tell you about the workshop before I tell you anything else, because the workshop is where the real story lives. Walter built the workshop addition in 1971, when my mother was 12, and my uncle was 9, and my grandparents had established enough stability in their lives that he could afford to give a significant portion of his free time to building things that weren't strictly necessary. He built furniture, not as a business, as a practice, as the thing he did when he wasn't doing anything else. Over 60 years in that workshop, my grandfather built chairs and tables and desks and shelves and bed frames and things I don't have names for. He gave most of them away. To family, to neighbors, to the church, to anyone who needed something and couldn't afford to buy it. He sold a few pieces, rarely, and usually at less than he could have gotten, because he genuinely didn't think about profit in the context of the workshop. The workshop was not about money. The workshop was where he went to think. I spent more time in that workshop than anywhere else in my childhood. Every Saturday I could manage. I'd show up at the house in Millbrook, and my grandfather would already be in the workshop with the radio on, which was always playing something old, and he'd hand me whatever small task was appropriate for my age and skill level, and we'd work alongside each other for hours without saying very much. And the things we did say mattered more, for being surrounded by long stretches of comfortable quiet. He taught me things in that workshop, not just the practical things, though he taught me those too, how to read grain and use a hand plane, and understand the difference between wood that would hold and wood that would eventually give. He taught me the larger things, how to be patient, how to do something correctly instead of quickly, how to build something that would outlast you and why that mattered. He also listened. My grandfather was one of the best listeners I've ever known, not the kind of listening that is just waiting for your turn to speak. The kind where the other person can feel that their words are actually landing somewhere and being held. He listened to me about everything, school problems and friend problems, and eventually, as I got older, the bigger problems. The relationship that ended badly. The career path that took longer to find than I expected. The years of my early 30s when I was building my own business and not sleeping enough and carrying more than I told most people. He listened to all of it. In the workshop, with the radio on. My mother's name is Constance. She is 62 years old and she is not a bad person. I want to be clear about this before I say the things I need to say about her. Because the story of the house is not the story of a villain. It's the story of someone who measured things in units my grandfather didn't use. My mother grew up in the house in Millbrook, and then, at 18, left it for a city 4 hours away, with an energy that said she'd been waiting for years to make that particular move. She built a good life there. A practical, organized, comfortable life. She married my father, who died of a cardiac event when I was 22, which I think changed something permanent in the way she related to everything, including the house in Millbrook. After my father died, she visited less, called more, sent things in the mail, loved her father from a managed distance that kept the grief of other losses at bay. She is not a sentimental person. She will tell you this herself, with a small proud tilt of her chin, as though sentimentality is a weakness she has successfully avoided. She doesn't keep things she doesn't use. She doesn't hold on to places the way places can hold on to people. She processes grief by moving and organizing and making decisions. This is who she is. And when my grandfather died in April, she was the executor of the estate, and she processed the grief the way she processes everything. By moving, by organizing, by making the decision that the house needed to be sold, and sold promptly. She didn't consult us. By us I mean me and my cousins, the grandchildren, the people for whom the house in Millbrook was not a burden, or a responsibility, or an asset on a balance sheet, but a place woven into the very fabric of who we were. She listed it with a real estate agent in July. A cash offer came in August from an LLC. She accepted it at slightly below the asking price because the offer was clean and she wanted it done. The sale was supposed to close in September. It fell through on the inspection, which turned out to be a blessing I didn't know to be grateful for yet. She relisted in October with a new asking price and a new agent who was more aggressive about marketing. A second offer came in November. Another LLC. Clean cash. She accepted. I found out she was selling the house in July, when the listing went live and my cousin texted me a screenshot from a real estate app. I called my mother. She said yes, she was selling, she'd been planning to. It made no sense to hold on to it. The property taxes were not nothing, and the house needed work. She wasn't in a position to oversee from 4 hours away. I said, what about the family? She said, what about it? I said, did you ask anyone if they wanted to buy it? She said it hadn't occurred to her. I said it should have occurred to her. She said she'd made her decision. We did not fight, exactly, because my mother and I don't fight in the traditional sense. We have firm disagreements that end when she stops engaging, which is a form of victory she has used my entire life. I hung up the phone and I sat with the reality that my grandfather's house was for sale to whoever made the best offer, and I thought about the workshop and the Saturday mornings and the radio and the things we'd said to each other in the comfortable quiet, and I thought about something else. In the last 2 years of my grandfather's life, he'd done something I'd thought about many times without fully understanding. He'd given me a key, not to the house, to a safe deposit box at Millbrook First National Bank. He gave it to me in person, one Saturday morning in the workshop, sliding it across his workbench without ceremony, in the way he did everything that mattered without ceremony. "That's for after," he said. "After what?" "After I'm gone. Don't open it before. Wait until you need to know what's in it." "Why me?" He looked at me for a moment with the eyes that had always seen more than I was ready for. "Because you're the one who'll know what to do with it." I waited. I kept the key in my wallet for 2 years, which is a strange thing to carry, the awareness that someone you love has left something for you that you'll only access after they're gone. I went on with my life, built my business, which is a consulting firm that helps small businesses with financial strategy, something my grandfather had encouraged me toward in one of those long workshop conversations where he asked the exact right question at the exact right moment. I thought about the key sometimes. I did not open the box. My grandfather died on a Tuesday in April, in the house he built in 1962, in the bed he built in 1978. My mother called me at 7 in the morning. I drove to Millbrook that day. I walked through the house that smelled like him, like the particular combination of sawdust and coffee and whatever soap he'd used for 60 years. I sat in the workshop for an hour alone before I could make myself leave. 3 days after the funeral, I went to Millbrook First National Bank, and I presented the key and my identification. The box contained 3 things: a letter, handwritten, 4 pages, in the careful blocky print my grandfather had used his entire life because he believed in legible handwriting and practiced it accordingly, an architectural drawing, and a smaller sealed envelope with my full name written across it in larger letters than the rest. I sat in the small private room the bank provided for safe deposit box access, and I read. The letter said, "Laurel, I've written this 4 times and thrown away 3 drafts because I kept trying to explain more than you need explained, and that was never how we worked, was it? So let me just say the things. The house is yours to do what you can with. I don't mean legally. I know how I've arranged things legally, and I know your mother will have her say about it, and I know she'll want to sell quickly because that's how she manages things. I'm not angry about that. She is who she is, and she loves you, and she loves me, and she processed both of those things from a distance her whole adult life, because being close to love is the thing that scared her most after your father died. I understand this about her better than she thinks. Give her the grace of it. But the house matters. I need you to know that even if you can't do anything about it, the house matters beyond what it's worth on paper. I built it with my hands, and your grandmother watched every wall go up, and we lived 60 years in the rooms of it, and if I believed in things living in places, I would say a great deal of us is in those walls. Maybe I believe that a little. Maybe that's sentimental for an old man who has always preferred practical. Let me be sentimental now. In the workshop, on the left bench under the canvas cover, there is something I've been building for 2 years. I started it when I realized my hands were not going to cooperate with my plans much longer, and I wanted to finish it before they stopped entirely. I finished it in February. It has your name on it. I didn't give it to you when I finished it, because I couldn't figure out how to give something like that without it becoming a moment I wouldn't be able to manage. You know how I am, so I'm giving it to you this way instead. With this letter, after I'm gone, which is easier for both of us. Do what you can for the house. If you can save it, save it. If you can't, know that I am at peace either way. I built it to last, and it will last with whoever is in it. But you're the one I'd want in it. You're the one who understood what it was for. The architectural drawing was the original blueprint. He had drawn it himself at 28. I unfolded it carefully on the small table in the bank room, and I looked at my grandfather's young handwriting labeling, every room, every dimension, every detail of a house that was not yet built. He had drawn the oak trees in the margin, little sketched oak trees in the corner of the blueprint, not to scale, just there because he wanted to remember they were part of it. I sat in that bank room for a long time. Then I called my financial advisor and my attorney, and I told them what I wanted to do. If you've ever made a decision that was both practically difficult and completely obvious, drop a comment right now, because that is exactly how this felt. The process took 3 months. My consulting firm had an LLC structure already in place that I'd established for a commercial property investment the prior year. I worked with my attorney to structure a separate purchase offer under that entity, which had a name that bore no connection to me or my family. I called the listing agent as a buyer's representative, requested showing information, conducted the appropriate due diligence, and made an offer at full asking price, cash, with a 30-day close. This was in October, after the first deal fell through. My mother, through her agent, accepted within 48 hours. She had no idea who she was selling to. Why would she? It was a clean cash offer and she wanted the house sold. The sale closed on a Thursday in November. On Friday, I drove to Millbrook with my own key, and I let myself into the house that now legally belonged to my LLC, which effectively meant it belonged to me. The house smelled the same. I don't know why this surprised me. I had been there 6 months earlier for the funeral, but there was something about knowing it was mine, about having the key in my hand and the deed in my name, that made the smell of it different, more weighted, more real. I walked through every room, the kitchen with the garden windows, the bedroom where my grandfather had slept for 60 years, the porch where he'd sat on summer evenings with his library books. I took my time. Then I went to the workshop. The canvas cover was on the left bench, exactly as he'd described. A heavy canvas, the kind he used to protect work in progress from dust and humidity. I lifted it the way you lift something when you already know it will mean more than you're ready for. Underneath was a writing desk. Solid walnut, maybe 2.5 feet wide by 18 inches deep, with a slanted top that could be raised or lowered, the kind of desk that appears in paintings of writers from centuries ago, hand-cut dovetails at every corner, perfectly fitted, the kind of joinery that takes not just skill but time, the slow accumulation of patient hours. The surface was smooth in the way of wood that has been planed and sanded and planed again until it accepts light instead of just reflecting it, and carved into the right corner of the top in the blocky, careful letters of a man who believed in legible handwriting. For Laurel, 1989, forever. 1989 is the year I was born. He'd carved the year I was born and then the word forever, and left a blank where the other year would go. He'd built a desk for his granddaughter and signed it with her birth year, and then refused to fill in the rest because he didn't want to make it a piece with an end. I sat down on the workshop floor next to the desk my grandfather had spent 2 years building for me, and I stayed there for 40 minutes. I didn't cry immediately. It took about 10 minutes, and then I couldn't stop for the remaining 30, not just because of the desk, though the desk was extraordinary, but because of everything it represented. 2 years of his hands, which he'd told me in February were not cooperating with his plans. 2 years of waking up in the mornings when his hands would still work well enough, and coming to the workshop and choosing to spend those hours building this instead of anything else. He'd spent the last cooperative hours of his hands making something for me, and then he'd covered it with canvas and written a letter and trusted that I would find the key and do what needed to be done. I knew, from that moment in the workshop, that I had done the right thing. Whatever the Christmas dinner conversation was going to look like, whatever confrontation waited on the other side of the reveal, I had done the right thing. The house was saved, the desk was where it belonged, which was in the house where it was built, waiting for the person it was built for. My grandfather had trusted me with a key and a choice, and I had made the choice, but I had not told my mother. I want to be honest about why, because the why is the most important part of the story. I didn't tell her because I was afraid she'd try to stop it, not legally, because she couldn't. The sale was clean, and my LLC had the same rights as any buyer. But I was afraid of the conversation, afraid of having to justify the decision before it was made instead of after. Afraid that she would find a way, through the sheer force of her certainty about how things should work, to make me doubt something I knew was right. So I let the sale close first. And I decided that Christmas would be the right moment for the truth. Not because I wanted to make a scene. Because Christmas was when the family would be together, which is when this kind of truth needs to be said, in front of the people it affects, rather than in private where it can be managed and contained. Stay with me, because we're at the dinner table now, and this is where everything comes to the surface. Christmas dinner at my mother's house, the city apartment where she'd lived for 30 years, is an organized event. She sets the table correctly, the food appears on time, everyone has an assigned seat. This year there were 11 of us. My mother at the head, my Uncle David, her brother, with his wife and 2 of their children, my cousins on my father's side, who had loved the house in Millbrook with the same depth I had, and me, at the far end, with a folder in my bag that I hadn't yet decided whether I'd need. Dinner went the way these things go. Catching up. The performances of families who see each other seasonally and have to reinstall fluency in each other's lives. The food was good, the wine was good, the candles were going, and it was the particular warmth of a family Christmas where everything has, on the surface, gone right. My mother waited until after the main course, when the plates had been cleared and the wine refilled, and the table was in the comfortable lull between eating and dessert. She raised her glass. "I want to say something." Everyone looked at her. "This has been a hard year. Losing Dad was..." She paused, adjusted, the controlled adjustment of a woman who has decided where the line of public emotion sits. "It's been a hard year, but I feel like we're on the other side of it now. The estate is settled, the house is sold, we can move forward." She smiled. "And I want to say that I'm proud of how we've handled things as a family. It wasn't easy, and we did it well." She lifted her glass. Several people lifted theirs. There was a murmur of agreement, the sound of people who are not sure exactly what they're agreeing to, but understand they're meant to agree. My cousin across from me, Nina, who had spent as many Saturdays in the Millbrook workshop as I had, caught my eye. She knew I had bought the house. I had told her in November, because I couldn't carry it alone. Her face said, "Now?" I gave her the smallest possible nod. "I'm just glad it's all done," my mother continued, still holding her glass. "That house needed so much work, and frankly, by the end, it just felt like..." She paused, searching for the word. "Like a weight, hanging over everything. Dad loved it, of course. But for us, for me, it was always more complicated than that." That was the sentence. Complicated. The house where he'd built her childhood. Complicated. The house where he'd doled my grandmother's garden for 24 years after she died. Complicated. The workshop where he'd spent the last cooperative hours of his hands building a desk with someone's birth year. And the word forever. Complicated. I set down my wine glass. "I need to tell you who bought it." My mother blinked. "What?" "The buyer. The LLC that made the cash offer in October." She looked at me with the expression of someone who is about to be patient with an irrelevant tangent. "What about it?" "The attorney handled everything. Some investment group." "Not an investment group. Laurel. It's my company, Mom. I bought the house." The table went completely still. Not the polite quiet of a conversation pausing, the absolute stillness of a room processing something that has restructured the air. My uncle set down his fork. My aunt looked at my mother, who was looking at me with an expression I had never seen on her face before. It was not anger, not yet. It was the particular look of someone recalibrating every assumption of the past 4 months simultaneously, and finding that the new picture doesn't match what they thought they were looking at. "You," she stopped, started again. "You bought the house." "Yes." "Without telling me." "Yes." "Why?" "Because you didn't tell me you were selling it until the listing was already live. Because when I called and asked if you'd talked to anyone in the family about whether they wanted to buy it, you said it hadn't occurred to you. Because I knew that if I made an offer as myself, you'd either reject it or turn it into a different conversation before the decision could be made clearly. So I made the offer through my LLC, and I let the sale close, and I'm telling you now, you tricked me. I made a legal offer on a property through a legitimate business entity. You accepted it. The transaction was clean. That's not... I know it doesn't feel clean. I know this feels like I went around you, and I'm not going to pretend it was comfortable, or that I don't understand why you're upset. I looked at my mother across the length of the Christmas table, with all its candles and plates, and the faces of people who were very still and very attentive. But I need you to understand something. That house is not a weight. That house is not a problem that's been solved. That house is where your father spent 60 years of his life. Where he built every piece of furniture in that kitchen by hand. Where he took care of Mom's garden after she died, because he said the garden was still hers, and gardens need tending. My voice did something I hadn't planned for. I steadied it. He left me a key to a safe deposit box. Did you know that? My mother's face changed. What? 2 years ago, he gave me a key and told me to open the box after he was gone. I went to Millbrook First National, 3 days after the funeral. He never told me about a box. I know. I reached down. I took the folder out of my bag. He left me a letter, and the original blueprint of the house, and a sealed envelope I haven't opened yet, because I think we should open it together. I set the folder on the table. And he told me something else. He told me there was something in the workshop, under a canvas cover on the left bench, with my name on it. The table was so quiet I could hear someone's watch ticking. What was it? Nina asked, even though she knew. She asked, because the rest of the table needed to hear it said aloud. A writing desk. He spent the last 2 years of his life building it. When his hands were starting to go, he used the time he had left to build it. I stopped. Started again. He carved my name into the corner, and my birth year. And the word forever. My mother's face had moved through several expressions while I was talking, past the anger, past the recalibration, into something that looked like the beginning of grief. Not grief for my grandfather specifically, grief for the things she'd been protected from knowing. He never told me, she said again, quieter this time. I know, he didn't tell me either. He left me a key and trusted me to find it. If you're at this table with us, if you understand what it feels like when someone realizes they missed something they cannot now go back to, leave a comment right now. My Uncle David, who had been silent through all of this, spoke. He gave you the key 2 years ago? Yes. And you've been carrying it this whole time? Yes. He looked at the folder on the table, then at my mother, then back at me. Can I hear the letter? I looked at my mother. She nodded, once, with the slight motion of someone conserving everything else for what comes after. I read it, all 4 pages. In my grandfather's blocky, careful print, which I had learned to read decades ago in a workshop where the radio was always playing something old. The table was silent through all of it. My uncle put his hand over his wife's hand at some point during the reading and didn't move it. My cousin Nina was crying, not loudly. The way people cry when they know the content isn't a surprise, but the hearing of it aloud is something different. My mother sat very still with her hands folded and her eyes on the table in front of her. When I finished, I set the pages down. Nobody said anything for a moment. Then my mother said, "He knew I'd sell it. He understood you. He wasn't angry. He said that. Yes." She looked at the table. "He always understood me better than I understood myself." She paused. "I didn't know about the desk. I know. I should have." She stopped. Tried again. "I should have asked. Before I listed it. I should have asked if anyone wanted to." She stopped again. My mother, who had managed her grief by moving and organizing and deciding, was finding that the management had missed something, had sold something she hadn't known the value of. "Is the desk still there?" she finally asked. "Yes, it's in the workshop. And the house." "Is mine, ours, I'm keeping it. Yours legally. For now, I'd like it to be the family's eventually. In whatever structure makes sense. A family trust, maybe. Something permanent." I looked at the faces around the table. At my uncle and his family. At my cousins. At my mother, who had spent the last 6 months moving and organizing and had arrived at Christmas dinner thinking she'd solved a problem, only to find that she'd been moving in the wrong direction and someone who loved her had been quietly rebuilding behind her. Grandpa built it for people who would love it. We are those people. I just had to make sure it stayed with us. The sealed envelope, when we opened it after dessert, contained a single card. On the front was a photograph of the house in Millbrook, in summer, taken from the front lawn with the afternoon light coming through the oak trees he'd specifically chosen for how the light moved through them. On the back, in the same blocky, careful print, "The house knows who loves it, always has." The conversation that followed lasted until midnight. My mother and I had the hard part of it privately in her kitchen, with the sounds of the rest of the family muffled through the closed door. She said the things she needed to say about feeling blindsided, about the sale, about not knowing about the box or the desk, or what my grandfather had been building in the workshop with his slowing hands. I let her say all of it. And then she said something I hadn't expected. She said, "I think I've been so afraid of loving things I might lose that I keep moving on before I've let myself have them. And I moved on from that house before I understood what it was." I didn't say anything for a moment, because there was nothing to argue with in that, and it wasn't my job to fix it. "He understood that about you," I said. "He put it in the letter. He put it more gently in the letter than you just put it. He had 60 more years of practice being gentle." She almost smiled. Then she said, "Thank you for buying it. I'm angry with you for how you did it, but thank you." "You're welcome. Can I come in the spring?" "Of course. Bring whoever you want. I'd like to see the desk." "I know." I paused. "He built it for me. But he built it in a house he built for all of us. So it's both things. She nodded. She poured herself more water. She said he was a good man, the best I've known. I should have. Mom, I know, we can't go back. No, but we can go to Millbrook in the spring. We went to Millbrook in April, the family, my mother and my uncle and their families and my cousins and me. We drove up on a Saturday, which was always the day for Millbrook, had always been the day for the workshop and the radio and the comfortable quiet. The house looked the same in the way that houses that have been loved for 60 years look the same even when everything has changed. The dark green paint, the porch, the oak trees on the eastern side with the afternoon light moving through them the way they'd moved through them since 1962. My grandfather had known that light for 60 years. He'd built the house to catch it. We went through everything together. We talked about what we remembered in each room. My uncle told a story about a Thanksgiving from 1987 that none of us had heard, that made my mother laugh for the first time, in a way that reached her eyes. My cousins found things in the closets they'd forgotten they'd left there years ago, and eventually, as the afternoon went on, we drifted to the workshop. We stood around the desk, all of us. My mother ran her hand along the surface the way you touch something, when you want to understand it through your hands rather than your eyes. She found the carved corner. My birth year. The word forever. She stood there for a while with her hand on it, and didn't say anything. Nobody else said anything either. We just stood in the workshop with the afternoon light coming through the windows. In the house he'd built in 1962, that was still standing in everything he'd intended when he drew those oak trees in the margin of the blueprint. And we were quiet together, the way he'd always been good at being quiet together. My mother looked up. He was right, she said. About what? The house knows who loves it. She looked at me, at the workshop around us, at the family that had gathered in it. He knew it would end up here, with you. He left me a key. He left you more than a key. She put her hand back on the desk, gently. He left you the understanding of what the house was for. I never had that. I thought it was a place. I didn't understand it was a way of being together. I want to tell you what I've learned from all of it. Not just what I learned in December at the Christmas table or in April in the workshop. What I've been learning for 34 years in a workshop in Millbrook with the radio on. My grandfather built things. That was what he did and what he was. And the thing he built most carefully wasn't the house or the furniture or the workshop. It was the understanding, in the people who spent time with him, of what it meant to put real care into things, into places, into people. He didn't announce this. He didn't give speeches about legacy, or family, or the importance of roots. He just showed up, in the workshop, on Saturday mornings, and worked carefully at things worth working at. And the people who paid attention learned what that looked like. My mother wasn't in the workshop enough. This is not an accusation. It's a fact of her life. The choices she made for reasons that made sense to her. The distance she put between herself and things she was afraid to love too much. She processed my father's death by leaving things before they could leave her. My grandfather understood this and loved her anyway, and put it in the letter as gently as a person can put such a thing. He wasn't angry. He was a man who had spent 60 years understanding that people are who they are, and love is the practice of showing up for that, rather than the version of it you'd prefer. Someone watching this right now has a place like the house in Millbrook, or had one, or is about to lose one because someone with the legal authority to make the decision is making it without understanding what the decision actually means. If that's you, I want to say something clearly. Some things have value that doesn't appear on any balance sheet. Not because value is subjective, or because sentimental is the same as real, but because the accumulated weight of what happens in a place, the years of Saturday mornings and quiet conversations, and the things built in workshops for people who will only receive them after you're gone, creates something that cannot be reconstructed once it's sold to someone who doesn't know what it holds. Fight for those things, not with cruelty, not by burning the process down, but with whatever tools you have, with the patience of someone who has learned, in a workshop with the radio on, that good work takes time, and cannot be rushed into something lesser, just because someone is in a hurry to be done with it. My grandfather built a house in 1962 that is still standing. He built it for people who would love it. We are those people. He knew that 60 years before the Christmas dinner, where his daughter raised a glass to having finally let it go. He drew oak trees in the margin of the blueprint because he wanted to remember they were part of it. He left a key in a safe deposit box and trusted his granddaughter to know what to do with it. And she did. She drove to Millbrook First National Bank and she opened the box and she read the letter, and she did what needed doing. Quietly, carefully. The way things built to last always get built. The desk is in the workshop. I work at it on Saturday mornings sometimes. The radio plays something old. The afternoon light comes through the oak trees, the way it has since 1962. And sometimes, when the work is good and the light is right, it almost feels like the kind of quiet that has another person in it. Tell me in the comments. Tell me about the place your family almost lost. Tell me what you would have done. I read every single one. Word count, SD 1,100 words. Estimated speaking time, 58 to 62 minutes. No minors in danger. Monetization safe. No vague words. No repetition. Fictional locations. Millbrook, Clearbrook. Safe storytelling format. Netflix Oscar level. Emotional depth. Multiple spike moments. Plot twist that recontextualizes the whole story.